And welcome to a truly special edition of Ben's Junk. It's so special that I really should remind everyone that Ben's Junk is not to be exposed to nor pointed at bright light for any prolonged period of time. Dirty jokes aside, I have actually been looking forward to this one here. So, just a few weeks ago, I put out a thrifting video right at the end of December. And for me, the heart of that video was roughly the second half of the final thrifting segment in there. And that was me at a Goodwill and finding a very early video camera. And just the camera, nothing to hook it to per se. And I'd never seen one in person before. I found the little kind of half-sized VCRs before, back when it was, before camcorders. It was a Portapak styled sort of deal. But yeah, I tested it out as best as I could in the store. I was kind of fretting about dropping 35 bucks on it, but I wound up doing it just because I'd never seen one in person before. Online, there were no complete units, certainly none in box, so I took the gamble and it paid off. Everything works as well as can be expected for something of this vintage. And yeah, here we go. So anyway, I'll back up a bit. In, I believe it was October of 1977, RCA put out their first VHS decks. And I believe that whole line was only 2 units. The full-size deal, top loading and everything, kind of what you would think of with an early home video VHS or Betamax deck. And then there was the half-sized sort of deal, which you could still do most of all the same everyday stuff with, but most people would only buy those smaller ones to strap around their neck and hook up a camera to. But then again, if you were dropping, certainly for the full-sized units in 1977, 78, north of $1,000 in the money of that time, you might as well just go whole hog and drop the extra, I think, 200 or so on the camera. So anyway, obviously somebody did at the time, and it has since kind of fallen into my possession here. So anyway, in 1977, in tandem with those first 2 RCA Selectavision VHS decks, there were 2 cameras that you could choose from. The black and white, the BW001, and a color unit, which I think was the 002, CC002. And the survival rate of the color ones is not all that great. The ones that are still out there and working, the colors have gotten really off. And I don't know how you would fix something like that. I'm sure somebody out there knows a lot more than I do. This is a little bit out of my depth, but I think I'm capable of using a consumer-grade camera. Certainly something as basic as this. You will find out just how, when it comes down to it, how ghetto these things were. I could totally see some kid getting a hand-me-down, one of these in the 80s or 90s, or finding one at a garage sale or something, and having that be their first camera and just being kind of perpetually chained to the VCR at home. But anyway, the structure of this one is going to be as follows. I'm going to take a cut here. I'll zoom in the camera, and this one. And we'll look at the individual parts. I'll discuss them as best as I can, and we'll do a live test, if you will. I've got my PVM, my little monitor, ready to go. And then we'll end with the final product. And of course, since these were intended to be used with VHS, we will do some real honest-to-God VHS footage. And then in the name of squeezing as much quality as possible out of one of these, I'm going to go direct to the computer so we can get as pure a look as possible at one of these things. So yeah, let me take a cut here and we'll start looking at the individual parts. All right, let's start running down the parts here, and we might as well start with the camera proper, as mentioned several times now, BW003. And when I got this, I was actually kind of fretting, should I take the stickers off, with the previous owner's notes to themselves on there, and well, it's kind of scratched up. I did try and use some scratch remover on this. It did not work. You know what, let's just leave the stickers. It's more soulful that way, if you will. And as you can see, whoever was using this was a real hardcore techie, you know, deep stuff like remove lens cap, turn the volume off on the TV, because otherwise it's going to be feedback city in most circumstances. But yeah, there we go. So the camera is actually kind of ghetto when you think about it. I would say a Super 8 sound rig actually would have been much more practical in 1978 than this. So, and more versatile and cheaper. But anyway, let's try and run this sucker down. You do have a pistol grip here, and thankfully it has a spot to hook up to a tripod, because there is zero stabilization to this. So unless you are hardcore locked off with this sucker, it is everything is in true puke-vision. Now, this is one of those times where I really wish I could make my camera look down the viewfinder properly, because it is a bit of a joke. But if you could see deep down in there, there's a couple of patterns that are supposed to help guide you to line up your shot. You know, just kind of a 4:3 aspect ratio sort of thing. There's two of them, a smaller one in the center and a larger one out. But for one, there's no zoom on this. There's only a very weak focus knob, which I'll get back to in a minute. But also, even though it tries to line you up and there's a little LED that comes on here, it's just hopeless. So if you're using the viewfinder, you're going to wind up about 30 degrees higher than the thing you're trying to shoot. So yeah, Lord have mercy on anyone trying to use this in the field. It's like you'd need a second person with a little monitor and hopefully some way of powering it, you know, walking around with you trying to shoot whatever it is. And yeah, that would just be a horrible mess. So yeah, this is really more the sort of thing that was almost a novelty. You know, you'd have it in the family room, living room, whatever, and hooked up to the VCR, to the TV, so you could monitor yourself. And it would be the thing that you would shoot your kids on Christmas morning opening their presents with, that sort of deal. The cable is, I think it's 10 feet. So I guess if the dinner table is close enough by, you could shoot that or whatever. But yeah, it's not exactly versatile. So anyway, I mentioned that the focus is kind of a joke here. So, even though I'm not supposed to do this for any period of time, but yeah, the Vidicon is down there. And here is the whole sweep of it. So effectively, it's 1/4 meter up to 1 meter for zoom. Which, to put this in perspective on your phone, you can kind of dial in, I think it's 0.1 up to, you know, 1/10 of a meter up to 4 meters. Yeah, you're dealing with maybe about 1/4 of that power here. And you will see that this thing is not fun to focus. Exposure is all automatic, and it does work okay. It's a tad slow, but even modern cameras are a bit slow when it comes to that sort of thing. So, yeah, whatever. Built-in microphone, and I'll come back to that. That is kind of the difference between the 001 and this model. But anyway, RCA was not generally known for, I don't know if this is quite proprietary, but it's esoteric enough, certainly, that it just seems weird for them. You know, like Sony loved their proprietary stuff. So to hook this up, you've got an 8-pin thing down there, but it's not a DIN cable, and it's not EIAJ. It's just, maybe somebody can fill me in, but it just seems to be its own thing. So anyway, that would hook to, assuming you were recording at home, this bad boy. So your camera would go into here. We got the appropriate socket. And since this is a Vidicon tube, thing. You do have to warm it up a little. So you turn it on, the light would come on, and you just kind of leave it for a couple minutes. Now, I learned the hard way early, very, very early on, that you don't want to turn it right back off because it'll get kind of confused and the light will stick on. So yeah, you do have to keep that in mind. And more notes to self from the previous owner. But if we go to the back here, of course, it's just a normal old two-prong thing, polarized. And you do have a spare outlet, if you're so inclined, two-prong. And PL259 UHF for the video output. And I'll show you the cable. They gave you an adapter cable. Normally these days, if we're stuck with something like this, they do have adapters, where you just screw it on and it just becomes phono female, and it's a little more versatile. So anyway, the main difference between the 001 and 003 is in the audio department here. So on the 001, you had your choice of audio output on phono or 3.5 millimeter, 1/8 inch. Here it's all been consolidated to just phono. So if you happen to need something else or want to split it off, you'll have to worry about that yourself. Otherwise, there is a pause feature. So, a lot of times on VCRs, or almost to the end, you sometimes would have an 1/8 inch jack. And if you wondered what that is for, well, one thing you could do with it is make your VCR pause. Now, I'm not a big fan of pausing tapes, especially these days, because everything's getting older. And yeah, if you're old enough to remember renting VHS tapes or beta tapes at the Blockbuster or wherever, you could always see where somebody had abused the pause button or rewound and fast forwarded a lot because the tape would kind of spaz on you. So yeah, I don't really want to use the pause. And it's just as well because this is actually a 2.5 millimeter jack, because that's what those early RCA VHS decks had. The VCRs I own with a pause input are 3.5. Now there are adapters and adapter cables out there, but for the reasons I stated, I'm just not going to go there. So there is that one test that I'm not going to do, but yeah, in case you wondered what the significance of all that was. So moving on to the cables, we do have a 2.5 millimeter cable, which we're not going to use. Now, of course, there were no stereo consumer VCRs, certainly quite yet, in 1978. So for audio, what we would normally think of as right channel stereo is actually just mono audio. And then for the video, we got this funky little adapter cable, PL259 on one end, and phono on the other, and white as opposed to yellow, because we usually think yellow when we think composite video on phono. But yeah, so not even an adapter like we would think of, but yeah, so this is just the beginning of it. So now imagine adding in the VCR and your TV and anything else you might need. For a nerd like me nowadays, maybe running it right to the computer, or maybe I'd have to run it through the VCR to get to the computer, so which I think I will have to do. And yeah, this is gonna become kind of a jungle after a while. But let me take a cut here, I'll set it up, and I'll try and show this in action and show kind of what a mess this is. Okay, so here is more or less what the average person's setup would have been at the time, if not necessarily quite period accurate, at least stuff that existed in the late 70s. So just for something to look at briefly, I've got the calibar hooked up for a test pattern, and to distinguish color in black and white, so there's no tomfoolery going on here. So anyway, the setup is we've got, of course, the camera running to the brick in between the VCR and the monitor. The brick is running out to the VCR, and then we're monitoring from the VCR on my PVM. So I've split off my studio lighting here, all two lights that I own, because if things aren't pretty well lit, the camera doesn't pick stuff up very well. And it doesn't pick up stuff very well, even at the best of times. But I've got my second light pointed on the left part of the room here, where I've got my reel-to-reel deck with the dust cover on it. We'll try and focus on the word TIAC, the brand name. And then I've got a Leo Kottke album sitting on my creaky old office chair next to it with a black and white picture of Kottke on the cover. And we'll see how well it can discern faces and stuff. So I'm sure I'll have to move the modern camera at some point, but I wanted you to get at least kind of a basic sweep of things. So anyway, let's change the channel to the appropriate thing. Everything's all warmed up and ready to go. I just have the lens cap still on the camera, so let me pop that off. There we go. And I suppose this would be a lot more effective if I move the camera. It's going to be total Dutch angle sort of stuff here. Apologies. So anyway, just amusingly, if I were to look through the viewfinder at the brick next to the TV where the camera is hooked up to, this is what, to me in the viewfinder, a centered shot looks like. And I'll have to dig out my second tripod here. So yeah, everything is kind of off. What is dead center in the viewfinder is right at the top of the shot. At least the, I guess you could say the center, so to speak, is okay. But anyway, let's try and focus on the TIAC. And again, there's no zoom, so I'm just kind of stuck. And that's about as tight a focus as I can get. Okay, let's try the Leo Kottke album. Okay, that's about as good as I can get. I'm actually focusing more on the letters. So yeah, that's really about all you've got. Since I don't have the pause going, I can press this button all day and nothing happens. But yeah, very, very limited. And I guess we'll do the psychedelic TV thing just quickly there. All right, so that's really about all this thing has. So I'll take a cut here. I'll do some footage on VHS, and I'll do some footage direct to the computer. So yeah, let me shoot some crappy home movies, and I'll do a quick closing segment, and then we'll end things out with some footage, some proper footage, not just me pointing the camcorder at the monitor. Okay, I've got such a huge mess that I can't even place my main tripod down, but I thought I'd give you just a little lay of the damage here. Just all my crap, everything out. Yeah, just a horrible mess. So I will talk, to keep the audio test going, I did talk over the new old camcorder footage, the BW003 stuff. So without further ado, here is the grand total of about 6 minutes of stuff that I shot. Okay, we are rolling. I've still got the lens cap on, and I've noticed that it's getting a little streaky when it gets onto bright stuff, even shortly, so I guess I'm really going to have to control things. But let's take off the cap there. I am on a tripod now, so at least I can set it down. So we're at about the same distance that I was earlier, so that's about what we're getting at 8 to 10 feet. And we'll try and get the that Top Key album and a couple of cassettes that I dug out. Now, whether or not they're all discernible, the real acid test is, can you tell what the two cassettes are? Can you read what they are? Okay, so let's swing back over to the TIAC. It takes a minute to lock off this particular tripod. Okay, judging from the PVM, I'm still monitoring myself. That's about as good as it gets. It still looks a little smeary to me, but oh well. And I could go totally meta and do the computer and record VHS all at once, but yeah, I'm going to do them separately. More for my own sanity. And for Christmas, a viewer sent me a couple of reel-to-reel tapes, but I don't think I'm going to get a good shot at them. Alright, so that's kind of the basic test of things that I can think of. Alright, so that'll do it for the VHS. Let's do some stuff to the computer now. And we're back. Got the lens cap on again. I should still be more or less focused from the VHS footage. We are direct now. This is us using this thing to its fullest potential. So that's about 6 to 8 feet there. Bring it in closer and still have it exist in the shot. Yeah, I'm noticing a little combing on the TIAC name, at least on the PVM. We'll see if that carries over to the direct feed. And yes, the computer is doing its thing right now. I love filling videos, you know, with this old gear with anachronistic stuff. Alright, I guess I better try a different lighting thing, maybe? Yeah, I'm just going to have to carry the tripod. So, there's that. I can't set the tripod down right now, otherwise everything's going to come crashing down, but hopefully it's readable. This is also about a 6-foot distance. And then now I will try and focus on things. You really have to ride the focus on this sucker. So yeah, I guess this is the sort of thing you would use at the time to, you know, shoot your crappy little living room talk show or something. But anyway, yeah, my pile of U-matic adapters and EIAJ stuff is not even really discernible. Come on. Yeah, that's about as, I think that's about as good as I'm getting here. Alright, well, I think I have a suitable amount of footage. So, that will be truly it for today's archive. Ben's Junk Thing video. I'll talk to you again soon. I'm too focused on playing with the focus.